All right, welcome everybody to our weekly connection. We use the Zohar to tap into some raw energy, and then we attempted to decipher and explain or tap into some aspect of that energy so that we can not only share, but also get inspiration for our own upcoming week. This week's portion is called Lech Lecha, and you shall go out for yourself. And that is like in the 1%, should I say, like in the literal story, this is the passage where Abraham is leaving his country, he's leaving his family, he's leaving his house, and he's going towards the land of Canaan. And he's being guided by this inner voice, by the supernal light of the Creator. And that's how, the story begins. So throughout, I would say the different stages, it says that Abraham had to go down to Egypt. Now, again, we are not talking about aspect of, I would say, history or culture that would not serve any purpose. There is a reason why the Zohar is discussing these stories, and if it brings up some names, countries, people, it is because there is an aspect of connection for us, an aspect of revelation for us. And Abraham is an aspect of revelation. Egypt is an aspect of revelation. And we're going to tap into this right now. So I'll start by reading the Aramaic passage, and then you will read the English passage. וירד אברהם מצרימה לגור שם מ"ט למצרים, אלא בגין דשקילה לגן ה' דכתיב כגן ה' כארץ מצרים, דתמן שקיל ונחת חד נהרה. דהיהו לימינה דכתיב שם האחד פישון, הוא הסובב את כל ארץ החבילה, אשר שם הזהב. All right, go ahead.
Want me to read?
Sure.
Okay. And Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there. Why did he go down to Egypt? Because it looked like the garden of Hashem, namely the Garden of Eden. As it is written, like the garden of Hashem, like the land of Egypt. Because a river flows down on the right, as it is written, the name of the first is Pishan, which encompasses the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold.
Thank you, Evan. And so Abraham represents or encompasses the seed level of spirituality. And he is the one, at least, that is counted after an individual that is looking inward to change his ways and to seek enlightenment, to seek God, to seek elevation. And so it is interesting that throughout his journey, he's several times being tested. And there are in total 10 tests that he goes through. And the ultimate of the test is the sacrifice of Isaac, of his son. And so again, we're not going to go into that story because it comes, like in a couple of weeks or so. But really what the test is about is that there is no light to be revealed if a person is not going through some layer of challenge. So we could say the layers are darkness, the layers are difficulties, divorce, separation, hurt, and whatnot. And then the person sees the light at the end of the tunnel, right? And it's even an expression. You always see, eventually you'll see the light at the end of the tunnel. But while you are in the tunnel, it's pretty dark, right? So you keep the hope and the faith that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Now, it is interesting because, when we're talking about a spiritual work, or when we're talking about tikkun, when we're talking about karma, which is basically the reason why the soul comes to have a human experience in this physical place. And so does the soul need to have that human experience? The soul doesn't. It is a voluntary journey of the soul to come and to cleanse, to learn those different lessons in spite of the challenges, in spite of the impossible mission that it is for the body consciousness, because it's like light years apart, the consciousness of the soul and the consciousness of the body. So this turmoil that the soul is putting himself through is something that we can't even describe with, like, as I'm trying to describe it, I'm losing some aspect of its true definition because it's on the level of the soul. And so when we're talking about tikkun, or we're talking about karma, even though we are translating the word tikkun as correction, that we're coming to correct, and we have said before that we're coming to correct, we also remember that we are experiencing life, we're experiencing this soul human experience in its weird different layers and shapes of the 1% physical reality. But when we are on the level of the soul, there is no good and bad. And so, when I was on a chat today, on a spiritual chat, and somebody was like, what is, like, in your opinion, what is karma? What is this? What is that? And it wasn't a Kabbalah thing. And I'm like part of all sorts of different groups because I love being inspired, first of all, and I always love to see what's out there. And today I was inclined to answer. I don't know if anybody read what I wrote, but I felt inclined to answer because this is what I know, and this is what I believe, and this is what, makes me feel that it sounds right. And it's not like to sound smarter than somebody else. I was really hoping that it's going to serve some level of purpose to somebody. A karma is not good and bad in the spiritual realm. A karma or tikkun is good and bad on earth. And so, again, we're going to link all this together to the decision of the soul to come and to have those different lessons to be learned. Now, if you're proactive about the lesson to be learned, imagine if you're forced to go to college, you wouldn't have the same experience as if you invested your entire summers and whatever, and you took like 2 years break to accumulate enough finance so that you can earn the right to go to college. Somebody who is like striving and dedicating his life and his mission to this cleaving towards something that they really want, contrary to somebody who is forced to do something, the experience is going to be totally opposite in the level of appreciation, in the level of victimhood, in the level of blame, in the level of being so happy, to go through whatever. So you have like those two extremes, with somebody who is proactive and somebody who is totally reactive to their movie. And so karma can be experienced as a human experience for the soul in a positive way. And so when we are raising our consciousness, whatever we do that helps us to raise our consciousness ultimately would help us to have a better human experience. Whatever we do or we don't do to elevate our consciousness would have the opposite result, which is to have a lower consciousness and everything that goes together with it. And there is like a guy, physician, biologist, a spiritual, whatever, Hopkins or whatever his name is. I just, had a conversation yesterday about him. And he created like this chart of energy, this chart of consciousness that goes from shame to enlightened. And there is a way developed by this Hopkins guy to measure this, not only with objects, but also with people. The lowest level of consciousness is shame, and there is a way to decipher and to describe what this level of consciousness can be manifested, experienced, thought as, felt as, and the easiest way to put it is self-destruct and even thoughts of suicide. And so somebody who is like in the lowest level of consciousness, there is ramification, there are consequences. Now, there are consequences, but it's like cause and effect. What did this person do or not do, say or not say, to lead him to have, to achieve this low level of consciousness? And vice versa, you have like individuals that are really, truly working on themselves, are really striving to a spiritual life, to a self-improvement, to the core level of the self-improvement. They are reaching inner peace and they become inners of peace, and ultimately they become enlightened people. And so no matter what would happen in a human experience for somebody who is enlightened, there is no good and bad. There is only good. A person who is enlightened, no matter what would happen, it would be wonderful. They would see the greatness, they would see the beauty, they would see the opportunity. Somebody who is gearing towards the lower consciousness, no matter what would happen, they would see it dark, they would see it bitter, they would see it something to blame and not to be appreciated. It's something to be destroyed and torn apart, or something is like going on and that they're trying to take advantage of. And so our level of consciousness is not the word is inflicted. Level of consciousness is not inflicted on us. It is earned. And we can earn the lower consciousness, and we can earn the higher consciousness. And so we just defined basically tikkun. In other words, if you're talking to a 6-year-old and you're explaining to this 6-year-old what is the purpose of life, what is the purpose of life, so that how do you know if you have successfully explained your purpose, your goal, your plan of what it is that you're doing, is that if that 6-year-old goes to another 6-year-old and explain in simple words what your plan is, what your goal is. If the child is not capable to pass it on to another child, the 6, 10 years old, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, it is a reflection of you not being clear about what your life's purpose is. And the way that the Zohar explains it, I mean, we're going to get back to what we're discussing today, but overall, when we're talking about the tikkun, when we're talking about the human experiences that we came to learn lessons, ultimately, no matter what happens, we're going to learn the lesson, the easy way or the hard way. It is in our hands to make it easier as we are raising our consciousness. We're choosing to raise our consciousness by living and leading a spiritual life, or having a bad time through that experience because we have chosen not to work on ourselves and to blame others and to victimize how I feel and what they've done to me and hold on to the grudge and what happened in the past. And so back to the Zohar, and Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there. So again, we're talking about Abraham. We're not talking about like a random normal person. We're talking about the seed level of spirituality. We're talking about the first man that ever had connection with the Creator, or at least in the way that he's described in the scriptures, etc. And so even Abraham has to go through all those tests, has to go to Egypt. What does the word Egypt mean? And so in Egypt, in Hebrew, the word Egypt is Mitzrayim, which comes from the root word of Metzer, which is narrow. And so we're not talking about the Egypt country or the Egyptian people. We're talking about a code word that is to reflect, that is to describe a level of consciousness or a level of test that we're going through. An environment, a relationship, a consciousness that is narrow-minded is something that is stubborn, something that is not flowing, something where there is no light and understanding, and where things just fall into place. When we talk, at least in the Zohar and in the Torah again was written 5,000 years ago, and the Zohar 2,000 years ago. We're talking here about things that are preceding nations, countries, etc. When we're talking about Israel, it represents the opposite of Mitzrayim. Again, those are not two countries at war. Those are two opposite levels of consciousness. One is enlightenment, and one is that it is the narrowest level of consciousness, where there is the least light possible. Now we can have two separate people that can have the same exact human experience. If one is on that level of consciousness and the other is on that level of consciousness, you will see clearly how they are experiencing what it is that they see, what it is that they perceive, one as being extremely positive, one as being extremely negative. Yes, they are somewhat like middle in the way that basically I would say that we are kind of like in the middle. Sometimes we're low consciousness and sometimes we are higher consciousness, but rarely are we, touching wood, are we like in that lower level of consciousness that there is like thoughts about ending it and complete self-destruct. And the other one that is basically like pure light. We are craving and we are working on getting towards that full enlightenment, but we are like sort of like, let's say like in the second half of that level of consciousness. But even us, sometimes in order to go to the next level, something has to give. Something has to break. And so it can be that you've been in a long-term relationship, but you have reached already, what's the word? The maximum potential of what could have been learned in a human experience from each other. And it is time to move on. And because of ethics, because of culture, because of like 100 different reasons, we are deciding not to move on. And resentment builds, and bitterness builds, and angst builds, and hatred builds. And eventually all the things are coming in that make the whole experience not pleasant at all. But very often I hear this in a conversation, I knew about it from the second year. I knew about it 5 years in the marriage. I knew about it 10 years in the marriage. How long have you been married? 20, 25, 30, whatever. And then, the divorce or they separate, some in good terms and some in very bad terms, but it doesn't really matter. The point that we want to extract from this is that we are all to learn those lessons from each other, from life, from experiences, and whatever is happening is coming to us with a very specific purpose. When we are stagnant, meaning that we have become comfortable, which is also a level of consciousness. We discussed it last week because that's the level of Noach, the level of comfortability, the level of routine. We are comfortable with routine. We are comfortable with the things that we know. We're comfortable with the things that we are aware. And that's not just like with finance or relationships or all sorts of things, but even with spirituality. There are a lot of people that used to, still today, but used to get into spirituality because they were scared. They were scared of what if they ignite, what if they turn on their spiritual capsule that would make them more alert, more genuine, more truthful. would make them more intuitive, would make them more connected and desiring more. That can represent maybe a certain level of a memory. A lot of people that I have encountered are scared to become spiritual because in a previous life, they were spiritual individuals, but like 100, 200 years ago, if you were a spiritual person, you were burned on the bush. And so a lot of people that I've encountered and a lot of people that are spiritual have a level of a past life where they were chased after, where they were exterminated, where they were murdered because of their spiritual choices, because of their level of connection, because of their aspiration. And so when we're talking about somebody who is aspiring today and he's aware and he's like awakened, we are in the age of Aquarius. So a lot of things are just like, like blasting on the critical mass. Egypt is somewhat necessary. It's not necessary as a layer of darkness. It is a layer. It is necessary as a stepping stone to sort of like, creating like a propulsion to go to the next level. So it's like, imagine that you are like, like on a rocket, and the rocket that goes to the moon, you have like, the first level that is like, like finishing like its layers of fuel and whatever. And then there is like another layer of fuel that is igniting after that. And then the third layer of fuel that is igniting until it reaches its destination. But the direction is very clear. It goes up and up and up and up until it reaches where it needs to go. The same goes for us. The thing is that lifespan that we have, we could have like, like 100 or 1,000 different trips, different stops. And sometimes we make the best of it. And sometimes we just drag our feet, because each one of those tests, when we're coming to this physical body, we are made to forget what is the purpose. And so this is where we sort of like need to relearn. And this is what, when the Zohar, when the Torah, when the Bible is talking about exile, we're not talking about exile of people, we're talking about exile of the soul, exile of the enlightened consciousness. That is, where am I? What am I? What am I supposed to do? What is my purpose? This is exile. When you are facing darkness and challenges and interruption and obstacles and hurt, that is exile, because you don't connect the effect, you don't connect the human experience, the lesson that you are about to live, about to step on, with the root cause. Why did you dictate? Why did you program to have this human experience in the first place? And so when we're talking about Abraham, he's the genuine, natural inspiration for us to see that he is going down to Egypt in a proactive way. Remember, we gave the example of, somebody who goes to college and worked hard to and works through like all the different phases to make it happen. And then you have one that is like being pushed and pressured by his parents and to learn something that he doesn't want or she doesn't want. And it's like 4 years that are like, miserable, and actually quits after 2 years, doesn't talk to his parents. I've known people like this. But anyway, the point is, when you're doing something proactive, like Abraham did something proactive as going to Egypt, searching inside, what is slowing me down? What is slowing me down? What are actually my areas where I'm slower, where I'm not revealing myself, where I'm enabling to crush me down, to hold me back? Because we all have that inner desire to be connected or reconnected to the light. That's the inner aspect of the soul. The soul just wants to be with the light all the time. But our laziness, our fears, our doubts, our uncertainty, those are the layers of the body that are just like arguments or excuses that the body consciousness makes to keep us astray, to keep us as far as possible from accomplishing our purpose. Now, if we're looking at the spiritual work as there is my wife is taking the kids to this place where they're they jump. I don't know how it's called exactly. You know what I'm talking about? Like they bounce. It's like cubes like this, and they bounce from one place to another, and like crickets and whatever. And if you think about it, this is what we do. This is what we should do. We should become as light as possible, as desiring as possible to go from one camp, to go from one step to another, one stage to another, and nothing holding us back. But we are stagnant on this one cube where sometimes, we have this desire to jump out and go to the next phase and to go to the next learning experience, but it's so heavy. And that experience, this relationship, this marriage, this neighbor, this money situation, this health situation is holding me back. So obviously those are the excuses of the body consciousness, but they are, in truth, if a person who is elevated and enlightened, there is nothing that slows that person down. So if you take the example of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, each one of them had incredible, impossible missions. Like Jacob was in the house of his father Lavan, who is known to be an evil person. And he was there for over 20 years. He could have stayed just for 14 years. He stayed in another 7 years, just another 7 years. Obviously, there was a bigger plan, but can you imagine you are the most spiritual person and you make the proactive decision because of an inner calling that tells you this is the right thing and not to break? Can you imagine to be in the most toxic environment and not break? Each and every single one of them went through excruciating pain, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and they couldn't do nothing about it. Joseph also went through all his years, like 30 years of being separated from his family, up to the point that his brothers are coming into Egypt. And again, Egypt is not a code. Egypt is where they're all assembling and where they're all going through raising all the sparks that have been lost out of hatred, out of jealousy. And as soon as they are recognizing each other, there is love and there is embrace and there is unity, and they're all going back to the house of their father, which is in the land of Canaan, or in other words, Israel, that represents elevation, that represents enlightenment. Each and every single individual, this is why they're not telling us that they're better than us, they're just showing us the example, the template of what spiritual work is. So you could have done like all your, manicured all your classes and all your scanning and all your tithing and dedications and whatnot. And a lot of these things have become, I don't want to say routine, but easier than, prior to when you were exercising all those things. So now that you're doing it, it comes more almost like I don't have to force you to come on a Monday night. I'd like to assume that it's a pleasure. It is a pleasure for me, and it requires really like zero effort. So does it mean I'm not revealing any light? I'm sure I'm revealing some aspect of light, but this is not my spiritual work is. Why? Because it has become second nature. And so this is why as soon as we have reached like this new cube that we have checked box, this is a checked box. What else in addition, not instead, what else in addition do I need to do to reveal light so that I can be lighter, make myself, my spiritual work, my spiritual being, my soul become more elevated so I can go to the next level and reveal even more light. And so, yes, Egypt for most of people can be experienced as darkness, as lack of empathy, lack of justice, lack of mercy, etc., etc. And it's true, it represents a land of slavery. But we're not talking again about, it can also be, by the way, physical slavery, but this is like what it incarnates is the idea of blocking, enslaving every aspect of freedom, of thought, of seeking truth, seeking to be who you're meant to be. You know, when we're talking about slavery, we know slavery as, you know, like all sorts of genocides and all sorts of people that were held hostages in their cultures for 100, for 200, for 300 years. But we're talking deeper than that. There are some peoples, there are some nations, there are some cultures that are not slave anymore, but in their genetics, they're still slave. They're still behaving as slaves. And we see that that carry from generation to generation. So when we're talking here about Egypt, yes, for one individual who has a higher consciousness is to elevate, they would take all those challenges, slavery, abandonment, rejection, lack of love, lack of justice, etc. And they're going to step on that, and they're going to make the best out of this experience so that they can become an inspiration, not only for themselves, their family, their friends, but for the world. And then you have, in opposite, you know, people that are experiencing Egypt, exactly the same situation, but they're going to remain victim for at least 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 generations. And it is entirely, unfortunately, it is entirely in our hands. So this being said, are there any questions?
Yehuda,
Yes.
if one doesn't believe in, if this is just one life, just one chance, just we make the decision, we're with our souls in heaven, and we choose this time to come down, isn't the purpose to just want to be back and close in the way that we act and live our life and think, to glorify and honor God in what we do and say and think? And in that way, is there ever a chance to not come back 10 lifetimes more?
You know, it's a good question, but the answer is tough. It's not tough to understand, it's tough to embrace. Meaning that just from the simple fact that I would say it is a proactive commitment and decision of the soul to come here and to go through those instances and human experience to learn those lessons. The soul doesn't have to. The soul chooses to. The soul is not punished. Your soul, or at least an aspect of your soul that comes here, because there are 8 billion sparks of soul, and we're all part of that oneness of a soul. But you came, your soul, or that aspect of your soul decided to come and say, hey, pick me, pick me, pick me, pick me. I want to go down. And I want to learn this lesson for all of us. So that if I'm learning this lesson, the other 8 billion don't have to. Those are the lessons that the Zohar also teaches us about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our forefathers. That once they have opened a gate of a lesson learned, the rest of us don't have to open that gate. And so just excite your nature to discover and of curiosity to find the pattern with intellectual discoveries, physical discoveries, Nobel Prizes, mathematics. The moment that somebody discovers something, suddenly everybody knows about it. You have like somebody who is doing the patent, but so at the same time, you have like 3 or 4 or 5 without stealing from each other, are fighting a very similar pattern. It's not a coincidence. The moment that a gate in the upper world is opened, it is open for everybody to tap into. And so this is the way to look at it if you want to have the best human experience, that you're not coming here to suffer, you're not coming here to be in pain, you're coming here to learn a lesson not only tremendously important for your own soul, but even more so for all humanity, for all the souls that exist and that existed before you. Because if we're keeping on coming back, it means that the souls before us didn't learn the lessons that we're about to learn. And the amount of light that we're about to reveal, only I or you can reveal and no one else. The aspect of that lesson that is about to be revealed like a fireworks of light, only you can reveal and nobody else. And so when our consciousness is not like bright, because we have been accustomed, we get accustomed to this physicality, to this level of consciousness that is made out of nature, physical nature. You know, even science today says openly, you know, the atoms is like 99% void. You take any atom of anything, of this can, of this computer, of my shirt, of anything, you could encompass the entire universe in my hand. If you just like squeeze everything, you remove all the void, the 99% of void, and you just leave this 1%, there is nothing left. It's all an illusion. Even the experience that we project into our life, it is a movie. And as long as the movie is not learned, it keeps on repeating. And so this is why you have a broken record movie, that when somebody is in pain, he just keeps on, you know, replaying it because the lesson is not being learned. So your higher self is like, Yehuda, come on. It's like I've been playing the same movie. You know, it's like my kids watch exactly the same movie over and over and over again. It's the same thing. As a parent, I'm like, you know, like you just give me a headache. My daughter, she don't say anything. She's like, keep on singing like the same annoying tune. She loves it. She loves it, but she keeps on singing it like for day in and day out. I can't anymore. But she loves it. So for her, it's not a repetition. She's in the loop. I'm not in a loop. I see that it's an annoying song. The same as if you see somebody that is going through like a toxic relationship, it's easy for you to see it. And you go to your friend because you care and you say, why don't you just drop this nonsense? Yes, but I can't. And that person makes all sorts of reasons because of timing, because of tikkun, because of karma, because they need to earn the lesson. They need to earn the lesson, because if you earn the lesson for them, you didn't do anything. They just have to repeat it. This is why nothing is injustice in the big scheme of things. Physical reality, I agree. Like in the physical reality, everything is unfair and unjust and it doesn't make sense. But in the spiritual reality, there is no injustice. Everything happens for a reason. We just forgot linking the two things together. So Egypt happens in our life for a reason. It's hard when we go through it. But the more things we do to elevate our consciousness and the more not just acceptable, the more embracing we are of the opportunity, and therefore we're shortening that process. Instead of lasting 5 years or 10 years, it lasts for a week. How do you see somebody who is growing spiritually if that person used to have like, you know, lashing out and an angry person or having like all this like a temper or whatever, and they used to like, you know, like shut down for a week? And there are people like that. They just shut down and you don't see them like for a month. And then the person starts working on himself, still shuts down, but it lasts for 2 days. Keeps working on himself, lasts for 2 hours. And you know what? It's possible that the person is still going to shut down after 40 years. But it's not the 30 days that it used to be and shutting down his entire life, his entire existence, and all his relationships. That goes together with what are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you believing to elevate your consciousness so that you can make the most out of this human experience? All right.
Thank you, Yehuda.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Anna. That was a great question. And Yehuda, it was a great answer.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great week. And I'll see you again, God willing, next Monday at 7. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Yehuda.
You're welcome.